Hello and welcome to A New Way Forward, Reimagining the Nonprofit Workplace virtual engagement series, presented by Council of Michigan Foundations, Michigan Nonprofit Association, Michigan Community Resources, and COACT Detroit. This engaging and interactive multi-part series is designed to provide guidance to nonprofits throughout Michigan as you consider re-entry into the workplace. Sessions are grounded in equity and designed to balance the exploration of legal, HR, and financial requirements, as well as ways to strengthen team culture, redefine the workspace, and realign to mission. I'm Kelly Kuhn, Vice President of Michigan Nonprofit Association, and I will serve as your host. Before we begin, we want to express our appreciation to anyone returning from our most recent sessions, as well as extend a warm welcome to those joining us for the first time. We have another great session planned today and are thrilled to have our panel of experts here to share their knowledge, guidance, and experience with creative design solutions for the workplace. Our moderator will be introducing them shortly. Few housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded. The recording and slides will be shared afterward. We have built in time for questions and answers. All participants are muted, so please use the chat function to answer your questions. As you know, the information around COVID-19 is moving at a rapid pace, and the situation is ever changing. We are all doing our best to understand and apply what we can. This context is important to express as we begin today, as our presenters plan to share guidance, which should not be construed as legal or financial advice. Today's session is number 2 in our series, and we'll focus on creative design solutions for the workplace. We had our kickoff on June 19th, where we had a robust conversation around reimagining the nonprofit workplace with special guest Governor Whitmer. Session 1 was June 26th and focused on legal guidance for safely returning to the workplace. The slides and webinar recordings for both the kickoff session and session 1 are available on each of the presenting organizations' websites. Now, to introduce our moderator, Felix Martinez. Felix is the leader of Weisendale team and an experienced industry professional who leads all business development efforts. He initiates and cultivates relationships between clients, brokerages, and the design community at large. A native of Detroit, Felix has more than a decade of experience ranging from project designer and business development at commercial design firms to serving as a lead representative of a furniture manufacturer. Felix is a true industry enthusiast whose volunteerism efforts strengthen the design community through various boards and committee involvement. He is a member of the Circle Donor and Emerge Affinity Group at the Chicago Museum of Contemporary Art, and he has also served as the Vice President of Membership for the International Interior Design Association. Welcome, Felix.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for that warm introduction there. Today, we are going to have an open dialogue with the panelists below. We have Nick Wise from Right Size Facility joining us, Sierra O'Leary from the Detroit Collaborative Design Center, and Jonathan from the Kresge Foundation. If you'd all like to turn on your cameras and introduce yourselves individually, that would be great. There you go. Awesome. Nick, go ahead. Start it off. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I'm Nick Weiss, principal at Right Size Detroit. We're a turnkey commercial interiors firm specializing in a plan, furnish, and service approach to creating beautiful workplaces, utilizing a blended solution of premium pre-owned, remanufactured, and new office furniture. We work closely with startups, nonprofits, government entities, and of course corporate clients to help them achieve a beautiful workspace that helps them create a healthy and productive environment while matching their aesthetic desires, their programming needs, and of course hitting the desired budget. We've enjoyed this last 4 months of learning a ton and collaborating with others to create some insight into how to return to the workplace. And we are working closely with clients to help them specifically get back into the workplace or create new workplaces that take the current situation into account. So I've got about 101 team members that have been researching and collaborating, gathering information that hopefully I can consolidate and share with you as we go through the webinar today. Looking forward to getting to know what you guys are looking for and working with this awesome panel on some ideas to share with you.
Great, thank you. And Sierra?
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Felix. I am one of 2 co-executive directors of the Detroit Collaborative Design Center. We're a nonprofit multidisciplinary design office that is based at the University of Detroit Mercy. We work primarily with community groups and nonprofits across the city on a range of projects, from park design to neighborhood planning to building rehabs to programming within the community. We really focus on community engagement and participation in the planning and design process to ensure that residents and community stakeholders have an active role in the decision making that impacts their built environment and neighborhoods. And we have the privilege to work with such amazing community partners really across Detroit. So our staff has been working from home during this time. We've had the privilege to do so, and our focus has really been on how to continue community engagement during this really challenging time so that it doesn't go by the wayside. So we've been thinking hard about that alongside our community partners, and I'm excited to share more about some of that work and some of the work we've seen throughout the city as well. In normal times, we're housed in 2 offices, one on campus at the University of Detroit Mercy in the School of Architecture, and we also have a second home at a shared community space called Neighborhood Home Base that's located on McNichols. That is a space that is managed and led by our partners at the Live 6 Alliance.
Nice, thank you. And Jonathan, last but not least.
Thanks, Felix, and good morning, everyone. I'm Jonathan Hui. I'm a program officer at the Kresge Foundation, working in our Detroit program. In Detroit, Kresge works in a few areas focused on neighborhoods through our work around children and families, community development, arts and culture, and others focused on Detroit's neighborhoods. And have also had the pleasure of working with some of the folks here and also with many of the co-hosts of the series, M&A, COACT, MCR, CMF, and others. Just have had the privilege of working with these wonderful partners in kind of thinking through how to best support nonprofits during this time and during these uncertain times. So just grateful to be here and looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. So for everybody listening in and viewing, this is definitely an open dialogue between the 4 of us. The chat will be active and moderated. So if you have any questions and you would like it in real time, please feel free to enter those in and we can get them integrated into the conversation. And we will have a Q&A around 11:25, 11:15 when we start wrapping this up, where we can dedicate that time. But yes, I just want to encourage also the panelists to cross question as well if you have different questions for each individual. And Jonathan, I'm going to stick with you as far as entering back into the workplace. And you're saying that when we talked before about how every nonprofit is different and every organization is different, well, what's really key is the individual and the individual within the organization. And if you could just speak a little bit more about that, how the nonprofits know best, and it really depends on the way you're working.
Yeah, thanks, Felix. So yeah, something that throughout the last few months as we've talked with our partners and really listened, understanding that we're not the experts, that nonprofits and the residents they work with are the experts of kind of what is most needed in community. I think something that has really been loud and clear are 2 main things. One is the fact that the needs of every nonprofit organization and their facilities are very different because they all focus on different populations, right? Some that are community hubs, some might serve young children and families, so the guidance, first of all, is very different, because of licensing and others, but also, if we think about the needs of individuals that come into those spaces, those are also very different, right? That, if you're bringing in young children, it's a very, very different context to an arts organization that's thinking about like reopening for performances, and very different from even K-12 schools. And so really a theme we've heard over and over again is the need to focus on the experience of people and of people in community, and even thinking about kind of not just about the space itself, but like as folks are thinking about reopening, they're needing to think about like childcare for staff, right? If we're going to reopen, our childcare facilities also reopening not just across the city, but in our neighborhood, so that our staff have access to it if they're coming back to work. How do we think about reopening in the context of the experience of residents? Like, if we're reopening our space, are they confident that like if they're coming into our space that like we're taking the right safety measures, that that every individual's needs are being met? And I think that has really been the key theme around just making sure that the beyond the space, it's the experience of like every individual of all ages within this space, and all the other spaces in the community are kind of that is first and foremost.
Yeah, and I think you're touching on a great point, is how our space is being utilized. And of course there is a digital divide among people as well. Not all people have access to technology. And Sierra, you mentioned about using the space kind of in an analog way to deliver messages. Can you speak a little bit about that, how the spaces are changing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will, if I may, I would first just build upon a little bit of what Jonathan was saying too, just to say that if attendees weren't able to participate in the first series, in the first session in this series of sessions, the leaders of the amazing organizers who are putting on this series spoke really thoughtfully about sort of the ideas that Jonathan is speaking about, especially designing our move back to the workplace in an inclusive way, in an accessible way that really puts workers first and make sure that people feel safe and comfortable in this space. So just look back there if you haven't heard those reflections already, because I think that's a really important note. And I also just wanted to recognize that there's been nonprofits who have been meeting really urgent needs on the front lines during the last few months, from health services to food distribution to otherwise. And I think we have some lessons to learn from them, but also just recognizing that they've been navigating this for some time, and thinking through those space needs while they're in the space.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth noting that, our intention when putting together this panel is that we would be a lot further. And I think as far as the phasing and reopening, but we don't know where it's at right now. There has been spikes, and unfortunately there are people still going through the challenging times and working on the front line. So absolutely, it's worth acknowledging.
And so more in response to your question, as I mentioned earlier, we've been thinking a lot about how to continue to engage with community members, residents, other stakeholders during this time, as have many of our partners, so many of our partners. And you bring up a really important point, because while there's been an abundance of Zoom meetings and online engagement forums that people have adapted and they've been really impactful, I've also been thinking a lot about how our spaces can be an opportunity to share information as well. So, at Neighborhood Home Base, I think about how we used to have sort of a counter full of postcards that was full of information sharing opportunities, which now is sort of not an option for information sharing. That doesn't feel like a very safe practice, but we are lucky to have a storefront space. So I know that Live 6 is thinking about how they can continue to use that space as a place for people to get information in addition to all of the other engagement strategies they're employing now to stay connected. But one of the things that is an opportunity for other spaces like home base is to really use that storefront space potentially as like a display board for people to come and get information. What does like a live time bulletin board to help people get the resources they need, connect to important resources that are out there, but also maybe neighborhood specific information. Just for example, the streetscape work on McNichols just kicked off. So how could that storefront space, even though it might not be ready to be fully active the way it once was, still be a place where people could come for information about what's happening in the neighborhood?
Yeah, and that's interesting, right? And it, you know, going off on a little bit of a tangent, you know, how to deliver the message. And I know people say printing and mailers are dead, but what happens to that industry, right? Getting out that message, more of the hand-to-hand type of message delivery, I think is super, is interesting, going to be interesting to see or watch. So once we're in the space, Nick, what are some, you know, varying sizes or varying in scale, whether you're a smaller nonprofit or a large nonprofit that has just an abundance of furniture? What are some solutions for reconfiguring the existing spaces, or where should people start?
Yeah, Jonathan made a really excellent point that you know, every nonprofit is so very different and they serve different needs, and so with that comes very different use for each of their spaces. Whether they are simply, you know, raising funds and coordinating to make sure that those funds are employed in an efficient way, and so their team is marketing and people making phone calls and doing development and not forward facing. You know, for instances like that where there isn't a community involvement aspect within their office, it's a lot more like a corporate setup where, you know, we're making sure that you know, the leadership is engaging with the team members in advance and sharing with them the plans and renderings that we're creating for them, so that they know in advance of the return to work that they are going to be supported and safe and secure in the new environment, and that there's a plan in place, because it's so much more than just partitions and protection and signage. It's education of the team members on how to utilize the space and what is being done to keep them safe. And of course, staggering of shifts. So somebody might work 1 week on, 1 week off, or you know, Monday, Tuesday, one shift, Wednesday, Thursday, another, and then a flex day on Friday. You know, to keep the density low in the office, because anything 20% or below in the office is deemed relatively safe. 20 to 50 is getting a little bit more cramped, and anything over 50% of team members in a typical office becomes very difficult to manage the spread of a virus if somebody gets infected. So with that comes protective measures like increased screens and partitions throughout the space, because, you know, we spent the last 10 years creating open benching everywhere, and reducing the cubicle farms and the panel size. So we're seeing a reversion back to that. We may not see the complete appearance of the, you know, high walled cubicle throughout, but we're very much creating spaces from these benching applications that resemble what used to be a cubicle, but with clear glass and you know, acoustic felt, which helps to kill the virus and things like that, and also reduces sound, because as we're adding these hard surfaces and screens, the reverberation of sound creates a lot of noise pollution. So a lot of things to consider, not only protecting the team members, but then for those institutions that do have a public-facing side, whether it's you know, therapy or social work, where they do need to see patients and consult with people and coach them on a one-on-one basis. We're creating areas that have you know, rooms with partitions, whether that's a lounge chair and a lounge chair, both bleach cleanable vinyl as opposed to fabric. And then a clear plexi screen in between the therapist and the patient, or between the caseworker and the family. We're replacing all those soft surfaces with either plastic guest chairs or bleach cleanable vinyl, so that, you know, especially as you have traffic in and out of the space, you can clean them in between each use. And then with some institutions that that see more of a general public, like Detroit Land Bank, for instance, creating a wall of security that protects the team members that have to see hundreds of people throughout the day and keeping them safe is a crucial factor. And in some cases, creating a protective measure, because tensions are high in this time. People are a little more excitable. So there are so many different levels, and so you've got the education component. We've got institutions we work with that work with children with autism, and so now that they're getting back into some sort of care, obviously the daycare and the education isn't completely back, but they're still seeing their patients, and what does that look like? So creating these areas where children can come in and develop and consult and play, everything needs to be cleanable and protected. So every institution is a little bit different, and whether it's a two-person startup in an office or a large $300 million a year operating budget a government nonprofit, there are a lot of things that go into that. But our team is working individually with each group and helping them come up with a custom plan. And it's important to us to help our community get back to work. So it's time that we don't charge for. It's a consultation and helping them take a look at their floor plan or their space and create a solution.
Yeah, and I think there are definitely some ownership should be with the actual building or the landlords where the spaces are, where the nonprofits are located. They have some requirements that they have to meet and upgrade, whether it's HVAC or things that are based in the actual lease that people can definitely take a look at. And I think that transparency and communication is paramount right now. Transparency between the employees and between the community in which in which people serve. And luckily being in the Midwest and we're in a little hot streak right now, can you guys talk about activating the outdoor space and how that is kind of influencing the way nonprofits work and the way that community engagement is happening right now? That's a general
definitely.
question. Yeah.
I can start. I know Nick has some thoughts and experience in this as well. I'll just start by saying that we know so well that both community convening and outdoor space are so essential to health and wellness. And we've learned that even more over the past few months. And it's important for us to figure out how to adapt to this time, even as we're planning for some sort of return to being able to meet together in person. But we know that we don't know when that will be. So how can we adapt to right now and take advantage of sort of what we have at our fingertips? So I think in response to your question, outdoor shared space can mean a couple of different things. It can mean, our community outdoor spaces like parks or open lot projects where there's already opportunities to convene community. So we see a lot of those spaces being really important for people to get out into right now. But there's also an opportunity to use those spaces for very spaced out community meetings and events or even office meetings, but really safely utilizing those outdoor spaces that are for and within community contexts. I also think that thinking about, nonprofit office space and where we're situated in different communities, patios and sidewalk space are also really important outdoor spaces. So how can some of our indoor functions extend outside into the alley, into the sidewalk, and create those safer opportunities for use and interaction as appropriate? So I think we've already seen opportunities for sidewalks to allow some functions to move outside, for instance, internet access or outdoor lobbies that have a lot more air circulation, or I've seen some businesses use part of their parking lot for outdoor break space for their staff that is landscaped or respite from the office, and also has that opportunity to space out and have greater air circulation. The other thing I wanted to mention is There's other opportunities for some of the things that people come to nonprofit spaces for that might be unconventional, like access to Wi-Fi, even just to have human connections, or that access to information that I was talking about earlier that again can extend out into the streetscape. One thing I was thinking about when preparing for this session was that just this past weekend, Livernois Avenue has this new streetscape with extra wide sidewalks to promote pedestrian activity, and it's actually an opportunity to create the spaciousness that we need in a moment like this. And this past weekend, they had sort of a shopping event to support the businesses on the avenue, and that, extra wide public space was a real asset.
Great.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And you hit the nail on the head with a lot of those, that kind of impact the interior space coming outside. That Wi-Fi extension is crucial because it's hard to put a lot of signage outside. And since smartphones are more prevalent, a lot of groups are using cell phone check-in, either, scanning QR codes or having numbers to text, where they can check in for their appointments, they can get information, and then wait outside, because a lot of institutions, and especially community health organizations that see sometimes 200, 250 people a day, and now that people are starting to re-enter those spaces and feel a little more comfortable seeking healthcare assistance, you've got tiny waiting rooms that were previously packed. And so, the trend has been to create some sort of outdoor space, those that have parking lots that are a lot less dense, because, the other tenants in the building or other people around are, cautiously getting back to work. We're able to take those spaces and do some placemaking and some activation to turn, especially downtown, some torn up cement and either resurface it, or in some cases lay gravel and some faux grass or grass roturf to create a really inviting space. We've added graffiti onto the shelving in a purposeful way, hung outdoor art, added tents, and then outdoor seating that can be easily cleaned, and that allows people to space out as they wait for their appointments or for teams to gather. We're seeing a resurgence in activation of just even community parks and spaces, which is kind of nice, and kind of a call to action for people to clean those up even more than we were doing previously, because teams are meeting outside in these parks and in these common areas. Some of the organizations I mentioned that are coming back to work either in 20 or 50% at a time in alternating days, when they're having their team meetings, they're meeting outside in park settings and kind of gathering almost kind of like on a UC Berkeley campus, where all of the poetry classes are outside in a circle, right? Seeing the same kind of thing with corporations for their team meetings. And so it's now, especially since it's nice out, more than ever important to engage the outdoor space and either transform unused space or parking lots or sidewalks, and use that technology and that expansion of Wi-Fi to allow people to check in without filling out forms or touching anything. So many of these factors are really coming into play and helping organizations get back open without cramming the interior space and creating dangerous environments.
Mm-hmm. And I want to address the reconfiguration, or if a not-for-profit is fortunate enough to have an abundance of furniture, are there ways to buy some of that back or reusable, which could then affect some tax credits at the end of the year? Are there any creative solutions like that available?
Absolutely. It's kind of a twofold approach. We're seeing some groups expand because of an increased need for their services in this, and since there is an unfortunate/fortunate influx of pre-owned furniture right now, with people either shutting down their offices to work from home exclusively, and so we're able to procure that furniture and offer it at a huge savings. In some cases, it's 2 or 3 years old. So we've got a lot of furniture that we can use to help companies grow. But at the same time, that de-densification we talked about, some people are just sitting in every other workstation to keep themselves distanced, but other entities want to de-densify and give back some square footage to their building because some of their team members can work from home. And that's where our labor side can come into play. Our designers can help reconfigure the space, remove some furniture, and offer a credit, absolutely. Whether that's for tax purposes, whether that's just, to offset the labor of that reconfiguration, us pulling that furniture out. But that's that reconfiguration and sometimes just, not necessarily buying anything new, but coming in and redesigning the space so that it can be more spread out. Sometimes that's just moving things around that they already have. Sometimes that's removing portions of the furniture and offering a credit back to offset that labor, or certainly, adding things as necessary because, there are some positive, signs, for companies and nonprofits right now that are supporting the pandemic efforts and growing tremendously right now. So we're seeing expansion of a lot of healthcare and nonprofit groups into adjacent spaces or taking over spaces that their neighbors are vacating because all of their software programmers can work from home indefinitely. So it's really a mix, and every group is different, but absolutely that labor and that removal of furniture is a big part of the solution.
Yeah. Nice. And Jonathan, what questions are your organization or the foundation are fielding more than anything about returning back to the workplace? Anything specific?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're hearing from our partners, and I think going back to Sierra's earlier point, first and foremost is like our nonprofit partners, a lot of them have stayed open and have been able to innovate and have had to innovate around these practices. And I think first and foremost, going to them and listening to what early childhood centers or folks that are providing basic needs or food security, what some of those organizations have already been doing, and kind of first and foremost looking to them and learning from what nonprofits have been doing. But I think what we've heard from a lot of our partners is this opportunity to connect across sectors, and whether it's connecting between nonprofits and the public sector, whether it's a connection kind of within the youth sector as a whole or within the community development sector as a whole, because so many spaces do serve those different populations, where there is an opportunity to connect with other organizations that have kind of that very specific kind of niche that they're serving, that with a very specific set of needs and context, where there's an opportunity to connect one organization to another to share some of those practices, I think has been kind of a theme. But the other has also been, where are opportunities to connect between the guidance issued by state and local governments with nonprofit organizations that can help operationalize those. So you have organizations like IFF in the early childhood space that's been able to take state level early childhood guidance and help translate that into, like, what does that mean day to day for an early childhood center that needs to kind of be able to implement that guidance. You have folks like DCDC and MCR that have been able to take kind of different pieces of guidance and help operationalize, centered on community engagement or centered on, MCR's done a ton of work around the legal guidance and how to kind of translate legal guidance into the operations of a nonprofit space. So I think that cross-sectoral translation has been really important. And then even cutting, the cross-sectoral coordination between nonprofits, right? You have lots of nonprofits that are youth serving and lots of nonprofits that are focused on neighborhoods and community development. But then lots of spaces do both, right? They're both centered in neighborhoods and focusing on youth. So how can those organizations also share practices that can kind of meet the needs of different populations? And that has also been kind of another ask of a lot of organizations, is to think about all of these different connection points and where there are lessons to learn from each other on.
Yeah, and we are all in this together and leaning on each other for resources and guidance and insight is super important. I know we got a question from the audience from Bonnie about how do we adapt going back into the workplace, or excuse me, the outdoor solutions were great for this time of year, but how do we adapt when the weather prohibits those such gatherings? And, part of it is really talking to your community and seeing what they're comfortable with in September and October when it starts getting a little cooler outside. And if you guys have any insight on that, how moving into indoors is going to work.
Yeah, I was going to add something about that. Hi, Bonnie. Glad you're on the call. You also have some resources that are important to this time as well, I think. But I think I think a lot of people are talking about this in the nonprofit sector, but also in the business sector, because right now a lot of solutions involve patios and outdoor dining and things like that. And I want to underscore that we're all figuring it out together, and there's so much uncertainty. So I don't think anybody knows the answers, and we'll be adapting as we go. But I also think right now is relevant too, because it's so hot, and that can be a real health concern for many people. And I think about the cooling centers in the city, and I'm thankful for them. And I think about how people sometimes use community spaces to warm up or cool down during these extreme seasons, and it's important to make sure those spaces continue. So there's that piece of the puzzle. But I think that while we don't have the solutions now as we move into the colder seasons, we're going to have to continue to be flexible and adapt. And maybe Nick has some specific design solutions that he has in mind, but
yeah.
I imagine similarly, it'll be sort of figuring out how we can use what we have already and de-densify it and make sure that there's adequate airflow and sanitized surfaces and all of those protective measures that will make sure people can get the services they need and nonprofits can do their work that is so important, but also people stay safe. So I don't have specific solutions, but I trust that like all the adaptation that we're doing right now will continue.
Yeah, and I think throughout workspace and when we're thinking about workplace, I believe HR has a louder voice now. I think a lot of the times we're talking about ROI and what does the space mean for us, and depending on your organization, really catering to the community is now more prevalent than ever because we are in challenging times right now. So I'm sorry, I cut you off, Nick. Go ahead.
No, that's a great point. And some of the things that we're seeing, one thing that I love about working with nonprofits is they're forward thinking, and we've already started the discussions on behalf of or in concert with our partners and our clients on what that's going to look like in the colder weather or if there's a storm. And so the conversations have started with landlords and with adjacent spaces because while a lot of corporations, a lot of big business is shrinking, we're seeing nonprofits have a need for additional space, especially those that are community facing, because they were already in very cramped spaces to begin with, just out of necessity. And so we're seeing the need for, especially those that have brought on more people to help support the efforts to curb the pandemic and support the community. So not only are their staff sizes larger, but they're seeing an influx of people visiting them for help. And so those waiting rooms, like I mentioned, are tiny. So, yes, we can go outside when it's nice, but some of them are talking to landlords and adjacent buildings to take over some space that might be vacant. And so, engaging your landlords and the real estate around you and those those that are really supportive of the community have been fantastic to work with and either expand space or we're tearing down walls and expanding, those waiting rooms. And then, like Sierra mentioned, creating those partitions and that safe space. Even though we're making it larger, people still need to be protected. So creating those cleanable surfaces, putting markers on chairs, on every other chair or every 2 chairs to make sure that people aren't using every single seat. Because it really is an education thing. people are creatures of habit. And those that don't take this seriously might revert back to the habit of just sitting down wherever there's no open seat. So you really have to go through the effort of taping them off or removing them, and then adding those partitions, adding that safety measure of somebody near the entryway, either in a booth, an enclosed booth, or just behind a screen that allows them to have an opening to take an infrared temperature, or even have a completely unmanned scanner that reads their face, takes their temperature, and allows them to proceed, with a green arrow if they're within range. That isn't a solution that solves all problems, because as we know, people that are pre-symptomatic could potentially spread the virus, but it's a measure of security that helps people feel safe. And sometimes that's just as important as something that actually makes people safe.
Yeah, on the last session, there are requirements for different organizations and for companies to hit what before they move back into the workplace. In general, when we think about space, I just want to hop back to the analog type of messaging and how we can communicate to the community. Jonathan or Sierra, can you guys expand on that just a little bit more?
Yeah, I can start, if that sounds good. So you mentioned it earlier, Felix, when you brought up good old-fashioned mail. And what we found, because we do work with a lot of partners whose resident populations and community stakeholders don't have access to the internet on a regular basis, or might not have the skills to hop on a Zoom call, as is so comfortable for many of us right now, which is definitely understandable. So a lot of our work has shifted to those analog tools. So I've heard consistently from partners and peers in this work that phone calls are sort of the most reliable and most impactful to have meaningful conversations that can be about community engagement around a particular project or effort, but also just making sure that people are staying connected, people are doing okay, who are, members of your community, and also getting the information they need about sort of your services and what's available at this time. So it's time consuming, but that's really been something that people are pointing to a lot right now, is just going back to phone calls. And then similar to what you were saying earlier, we've been doing a lot of physical mail surveys followed up with phone calls. Also, more creative worksheets, asking some of these questions about what, we're working on a lot of open space projects right now. So what does that community open space look like in the near and far term future? So that will be mailed in activities followed up with conversations. And then I've also heard that a lot of people are doing multiple things. So there might be an e-newsletter, but there's also a mailed newsletter to try to bridge that digital divide. And people have had a lot of success with those mailed newsletters. And I know some groups have even use this as an opportunity to get around to doing their mailed newsletter that they've been meaning to do for the last 3 years or whatever it might be. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities. We already have those tools, right? We've just the value of getting together in person is so important. So that's our default. It's become our default, but there's lots of other ways to stay connected that might not be a one-to-one, but we can deploy right now.
Mm-hmm.
And to add there too, I think, I know that a lot of our funder colleagues are on this call as well, and a lot of Detroit funders are already doing this, but something that we've been thinking about, and our funder colleagues have been thinking about too, is, to Sierra's point, where are the places where we can have flexibility within grant making to accommodate these necessary changes, right? So as Sierra was talking about the need to go more analog in community engagement, that changes the line item of what is needed in the grant, right? That requires significantly more human capital to do that. It probably takes a lot more time to do the kind of inclusive community engagement and reach the kind of cross section of the population that you were hoping to in your project. And the opportunity, hopefully there's an opportunity there to offer some flexibilities around timing of like grants may need to end later and be extended because nonprofits need more time to do things like inclusive community engagement during this time, or even flexibilities within line items around like how you use dollars, things that used to be supplies might now be people to make phone calls and such. So I know that that's something that a lot of folks in Detroit have been, a lot of funders in Detroit have been thinking about as well in terms of kind of offering these flexibilities to ensure that nonprofits have the time and the resources they need to make some of these necessary pivots around engagement.
I'll just add a couple of other ideas that I know some great community leaders are thinking about is how to, similar to using the storefront as a place for information exchange, how to sort of have a physical presence out in the communities, whether it's at parks or busy intersections. Are there temporary display boards that can help get the word out, maybe with opportunities for feedback boxes as well, creative ways to sort of continue the conversation that meet people where they're already at, like community gardens, etc. Another analog part of our landscape we're so used to is lawn signs, and how can they be repurposed for information sharing along these lines as well. So there's a lot of creative thinking out there in terms of information sharing and engagement.
That's a great point, Sarah. Just because a typical office can engage their employees through email and text and digital messaging about how to use the space when they get there, but community-facing nonprofits don't have that ability. You can do a mailer, but those aren't foolproof, and certainly a lot of the people that visit aren't checking email or going to your website. So having that analog exposure and signage about how to use the space and how to be safe is crucial. So even just branding the heck out of your storefront and then your interior as people enter, and also making sure that there are pictographs in addition to words, so that everybody understands and can utilize the space safely. And companies are doing a great job of designing those graphics, and we're working to customize those for each individual entity where necessary. And then nobody budgeted for this, right? Nobody was, sitting around in November and December and saying, let's, put another $50,000 in our operating budget for, the off chance of a pandemic in 2020. So, the grants and the funding, the people that have come in to save the day, for these nonprofits to help them continue to operate safely has been, a huge asset. So financing or funding or grants that allow them to not only put it towards the community, put it towards their space and help reopen, those have been absolutely impactful in helping a lot of entities get back up and running.
Yeah, and have you seen a lot of organizations implement the signage that a lot of firms are releasing, or the big 6 foot radius on the ground? Are a lot of those being implemented, or are those just still kind of theoretical practices?
Oh, absolutely. It's part of the very beginning of almost every conversation we have with a group trying to get back up and running. So it's the least expensive portion of the whole project usually as well. So it's the first thing that they're able to implement. And it goes back to that education. If people are using the space wisely and safely and responsibly because of that messaging and that signage, then you're one step closer to keeping everybody safe. So signage is the first thing that we talk about, and signage and disinfecting measures and PPE. So because those are with the exception of Purell stands costing 70 times what they did 5 months ago, those are the least expensive things you can do for a space before we start looking at furniture and reconfiguring and construction and all that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I will add that those ideas around signage and sanitizing and sort of distributing seating are also relevant to outdoor spaces too. So in the open space planning and design that we're doing with our community partners right now, those are things that we're thinking about in response to right now. So how can outdoor spaces still be a place for communities to meet or, find respite, but there are hand washing stations, and there is clear signage and imagery about sort of safe practices. And then how can seating be maybe less clustered, but more for small groups? So it can be integrated into outdoor design as well as indoor spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess this is just a general question for everybody. When we're talking about these creative solutions and they're somewhat temporary solutions, what about the waste, or how? And Nick, maybe you can speak to this more. When the plexiglass or when the partitions are put in, if they're only available for the remainder of 2020, what are companies or workplaces going to do for those years beyond? Are there different creative solutions on how to turn those into the second life almost?
Absolutely. And it really is going to depend on how long we are facing this, before a vaccine becomes widespread and the cases and the deaths go down to nil. So, it's possible that this is several years of caution. If it lasts long enough, it could change people's mindsets to be safer and more protective going forward. Or if things turn around quickly and the medical community finds ways to make this all but go away, we could, just like the 1918 pandemic, go back to hugging and shaking hands and having no personal barriers at all, because this happened once before in the world, and very quickly people went back to being social creatures and creatures of habit. So we don't know, just like Sierra mentioned, we're all learning together, and so we're not sure what's going to happen in 2021 and beyond. But what we are doing is making purposeful use of the protective measures. So the partitions between people or between workstations are oftentimes dry erase boards or things that can be repurposed in the office for collaboration. The screens on the desks may very well remain for an extended period of time or indefinitely, just as people, you want people to feel comfortable coming into the space, and you want the people working there to feel protected. So, which is why we're trying to make those as beautiful as possible or as purposeful as possible, so they're not flimsy temporary boards that could go away. But the flimsy temporary boards that are least expensive can be disposed of without too much strife. So, but yes, we're using things that either furniture that's either hard plastic or bleach cleanable vinyl looks just as good in the space as the fabric that we replaced. So those things will remain indefinitely, as will probably the sanitization and hand washing stations. So really the only thing that's likely to get completely thrown away eventually is that signage and those decals. So that we're trying to make sure that everything that people use to add protection to the space is something that they're comfortable keeping there, or that adds value to the space in the long term.
Yeah, and can we dive deeper on the reconfiguring of the furniture? Based on the comments, what are some solutions for the larger, more older furniture that are in spaces that have been there for a while?
Sure. So a lot of the larger, older furniture, especially cubicles, are covered in fabric. So our team has been, recovering panels with either vinyl or laminate that can be cleaned on aisleways. If they're not high enough, there are custom or modular stackers that can be added to any system's furniture or every desk set, whether it rests on top or it clamps on. There's no limit to what we can do to make those partitions higher and safer. The people that haven't updated their space in a long time are actually in a really good place, because their workstations are huge, and oftentimes putting them 8 or 9 feet away from the closest person in the next cubicle. So those people that haven't updated in 25 years are in good shape for the most part, with the exception of decluttering the space. So one thing that we've encountered is a lot of clutter in spaces, and so working with teams to remove everything from the counters. We talked about postcards and flyers earlier, but that extends into the rest of the space. Unfortunately, children's toys in waiting rooms and in meeting spaces, you know, are going to have to go away temporarily, and that's going to be a challenge for those daycare centers. How do they operate? And they're going to be running around cleaning constantly. But decluttering the space, allowing for smooth surfaces, everything off the desktops, off the tables, removing small tables where people would meet, and making room for either no tables at all, or maybe tablet arms on chairs in meeting rooms where you can sanitize your own space. But eliminating that clutter is going to be a big portion of the safety measures as well. Getting rid of the tchotchkes and things like that can either absorb virus or prevent you from sanitizing the space every day. So that's been a big consideration. And then, you know, the old furniture, like old fabric couches and old clunky meeting spaces, you know, are making way for seating that can go further out around the room with little tablet tables or training tables that everybody can work at and have their own space to meet at. And then, of course, you know, just eliminating all of that soft seating, those old sofas, things that are just going to be difficult to clean or impossible to clean. So it's really kind of a whole, it's almost like the joy of organization, right? You know, going in and just assessing every little detail of a space, like the TV show, and every little portion of the space can be improved for safety and health as we go through.
Yeah, and excuse me, what has been the most innovative solution you've seen or been a part of designing?
It's really been incredible to see our industry kind of pivot and either dig things up from their existing catalogs or just innovate new. You know, in terms of technology, you know, the remote sensing thermometers, you know, the infrared sensors that can text you and alert you if somebody walks by that has an elevated temperature, are pretty fascinating, and they can set off an alert. You know, the ability to check into a space with a virtual kind of assistant that reads your face as an employee or as a regular visitor, and checks you in, you know, alerts everybody that you're there, that you've got no fever, and that and you can check the boxes that you haven't been out of the country or interacted with anyone with the virus. So technology's been incredible. And then of course the materials that are used, so being able to transition everything to solid surface, because we spent a lot of time in the last 10-15 years making every surface fabric covered, so you could sit anywhere. As people come out of private offices into cubicles and meeting spaces and waiting rooms, you know, every place, you want every place to be useful and some place somebody can sit. So removing all those fabric cushions and either replacing them with vinyl or solid surfaces has been a big portion of what we've been innovating. And then technology around fabrics and materials. So things that were previously used in healthcare, like copper and silver threads in fabrics and in mesh, are now transitioning into the everyday space. So copper mesh seating, you know, copper fabric, silver ions, silver threads in you know, vinyl and fabrics are making their way into the community and corporate spaces. So those things that help to kill the virus within minutes or hours as opposed to days have been crucial. So a lot of neat things, kind of a reversion back to brass. You know, in the 90s, brass was everywhere, and now everything's brushed nickel or chrome. So going back to brass fixtures on doors and on drawers, because brass it actively kills the virus. So we're kind of stepping back in time too. There's been a lot of technological innovation, but we're going back to brass and back to, you know, high walls and partitions as well, and you know, simple things like plantscaping. You know, not every solution has to be high tech. We're going through and using walls of plants as partitions as well, you know, to improve air quality, make people feel more comfortable, but then also, you know, create barriers that are beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And Sierra, Jonathan, have you seen any innovative solutions throughout the COVID, post-COVID right now?
I didn't know that about brass, so that's very interesting to me. This is one idea that has, I've heard from several groups that is definitely less high tech than some of the materials, et cetera, that Nick was just mentioning, is just thinking through nonprofit spaces that have large conference rooms or spaces for community to meet, and how those can be flexible right now, just like everything else. So thinking about how large community meeting spaces can actually accommodate smaller meetings. So we're not going to go back to, filling those spaces at capacity for quite some time still. But can those spaces help meet other nonprofit needs for the host organization, but maybe other partners as well? So another opportunity for collaboration. So can smaller numbers of people use that space for meetings? Can that be divided into that spacious office space that Nick has been talking about too? So repurposing those assets that are already part of our nonprofit spaces to meet the needs of this time. And then just on the topic of collaboration, I will say that I think that is where, as we've been saying throughout, that's really where there's an opportunity for more innovation as well, where, design meets community expertise, meets child care provider expertise. How do we create solutions that are really at the intersection of all those different needs and knowledge around how spaces work and need to work to meet the different community needs that nonprofits are serving? So I think that innovation is, as usual, comes out of that collaborative space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jonathan,
Yeah,
anything to
I
add
think
on
another. Yeah, and can you all hear me?
that? Mm-hmm.
My audio cut out earlier. I apologize, but the only other thing I can think of is a lot of organizations that we've partnered with have really been kind of rethinking how do we bring services to our neighbors as opposed to having our neighbors have to come to us, right? If facilities are closed, going back to that analog point, is that how can then organizations bring things into kind of to your block, and some of those have been through kind of mutual aid kind of systems. On the east side, you have things like 48214care.com that kind of was recently launched. We have partners that are leading projects through an initiative called Kresge Innovative Projects Detroit that have really been thinking a lot of them are physical projects. A lot of them are kind of parks projects or pocket parks that are promoting fitness. Well, folks can't do that anymore. So how can they bring resources to promote fitness to residents for them to do in their homes, while at the same time also acknowledging that there are kind of mobility challenges, and also acknowledging internet access challenges, right? So like not everything can be provided through kind of an app, or not everything can be provided through an online platform. So what are ways to still use the phone to connect, for organizations to connect with residents, where residents might at other times be coming to their facility, but now how do you rebuild your phone directory and just call folks and see how they can be supported during this time? And so just really incredible work by a lot of neighborhood organizations, by a lot of community development organizations across the city to reach their neighbors in ways that don't require them to come to kind of a central hub. And that has really just been really incredible, thoughtful, and inclusive work.
Yeah. Any other additional resources? And I know we're going to share a link, and there are some resources on the handouts for the attendees today. But anything outside of that where people can go and you guys would recommend to direct them?
Kind of a couple, and again, there's so many resources out there, but
yeah, just
a couple of kind of places where resources have been aggregated, going back to the earlier point about kind of cross-sectoral kind of information sharing. COVID 313 is a platform that has been run out of the city alongside partners like the United Way and a bunch of others. And that has been a resource hub for mostly for kind of going back to the human experience, for families, for residents to access different resources. There are a lot of resources on the COVID 313 platform for organizations as well. For early childhood providers and childcare providers, DetroitEarlyLearning.org is another really great resource. early childhood providers can use that to receive one-on-one technical assistance from Detroit nonprofits that can actually help them develop their COVID-19 response plans that are required by the state, and then be able to operationalize those into practice in their facilities. So those are two examples of kind of how different partners have come together. There are some platforms that are coming out around summer programs and youth summer programs and after school that the United Way, Skillman, and others have been developing. Resources also through the city around outdoor spaces and parks that GSD and some folks like the Wilson Foundation have been putting together as well. So, you know, lots of resources out there, but there are definitely a couple of hubs, COVID-313, DetroitEarlyLearning.org, where kind of a lot of these different pieces of information are aggregated.
Mm-hmm.
I would also, maybe this is the easy answer, but the organizations who are sponsoring this series and putting it on are a wealth of information and are committed to supporting nonprofits now and all the time. So that's definitely, those organizations have a lot to offer in this moment.
Yeah. And then Nick, does Right Size offer, I know we have been executing a lot of test fits, but can you talk a little bit about how organizations may be rethinking their space and for down the road for test fitting or more communal spaces within their offices?
Yeah, so those organizations that had plans originally to move in the coming year or so are at a unique advantage, ourselves included. You know, we're creating a new showroom in the next 6 months as well, and you know, they're kind of lucky to have the ability to plan a space around these protective measures. And so the new workplace, we're trying not to make drastic changes because we don't know what the future holds, but to incorporate, you know, some protective measures and heights of partitions and waiting rooms that foster that separation without it looking like you just pulled out a bunch of chairs. You know, so designing the space around these safety measures has been crucial, and we've got dozens and dozens and dozens of examples over the last couple of months. So, you know, even just using the people on this call as a resource as we navigate with our clients and our colleagues on what everybody's doing, you know, I think you know, this community, not only the hosts but the panel, you know, can share what we've seen with each of you and are happy to do so. You know, so each of my Workplace Solutions teams has under their belt a lot of different adaptations and changes, and I think anyone in the design community, you know, from design firms to architects, you know, especially those focused on nonprofits and community-based organizations like Sierra, are eager to share what we're constantly learning with anybody interested in redoing their space. And so, you know, everyone is different. It's hard to say that there are specific things, you know, for each office, but yes, you know, creating more spaces where people can get away from the open area, you know, small rooms that can be somebody's office for a day, meeting rooms that are technology focused. You know, webinars and Zoom are going to be here indefinitely. It's not that's certainly not a temporary thing. So having meeting rooms that are geared towards teleconferencing have been a huge adaptation as we're planning new spaces. So it's the traditional conference room, like Sierra said, is not going to be something we likely see in the near future or maybe ever again. It's going to be meeting rooms that are media focused, where the table emanates from the wall with a screen and speakers and a camera, and chairs set at distances that are comfortable for everyone, and not huge rooms. You know, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 people max, so everybody feels comfortable and can maintain that distance. That's probably been the biggest trend in having community engagement spaces that allow for spacing as well, and then common areas that have direction of travel. So the other thing that I haven't mentioned is direction of travel through any space. We see those one-way aisle arrows at Kroger that most people don't see or don't pay attention to, and then you bump into one another. Well, they're there for a reason, and it's hard sometimes to see them with the mask on and with so many people. But the same is true for inside any community space or workspace, creating a direction of travel that has people going in one door and out the other, and so people aren't brushing against one another in an aisleway. So a lot of creativity has gone into how do we make every space within a building one way. And so that's where signage comes in and directional arrows on the floor and on the walls. So sometimes taking the existing space and just using it in a different way is as impactful as designing a new space around the pandemic.
Yeah, and physical space is often such a big part of organizational culture. How have your organizations really tried to strengthen the culture and keep the culture of your organizations going throughout this time? Anybody? Well, I mean, even if on top of that, just if you guys could speak individually about the type of percentage of people returning or who have returned, just trying to get a sense of timing and what other people are thinking. If you guys can individually comment on that as well.
Yeah, so at DCDC, we have a small staff of 7 full-time staff, and then in our architecture, we also have architecture students who work alongside us every semester. So keeping our culture and morale up is really important for all of us, but especially the students who are, we've had some start during this time. So we want to make sure that they feel connected even as we are all working from home. So we actually have really regular all staff check-ins that include sort of a shooting the breeze period, just to, for mental health and staying connected to each other. Some people live alone, some people don't. Some people need a break from their families. So building that into our day, and then a lot of project meetings every day, but also incorporating flexibility so we don't all completely burn out on Zoom life. And then we also do, I think a lot of people are doing virtual happy hours and things like that. So all that is sort of internal things. And then, as I've mentioned, what's been really important is keeping up work with our community partners and adapting with them to community engagement and project needs. So that is really, really what we're focused on right now. And thankfully, we've been busy, and we've been all adapting together with our partners citywide. So that's been the focus of our work. And I will say, in terms of going back, we are privileged to be able to all work from home right now comfortably. Because as I mentioned, we have 2 homes. The neighborhood home base, we're really following Live 6's lead because they manage that space and are leaders in that space. And they're figuring it out just like the rest of us, and figuring out how that space can be most impactful to meet community needs and our office and working needs. And then on the flip side, we have an office on campus. So like many schools, Detroit Mercy is going to a hybrid flexible teaching model. So there will be some classes on campus, safety permitting, with a lot of protocols in place, as I'm sure you can imagine. Is pretty consistent among universities. And but those of us who are staff who are able to work remotely will continue to do so. I'm speaking in terms of DCDC in particular. So for now, we're working remotely, and I'm teaching a course in the summer in the fall in the architecture program. And my particular course, which is for more advanced architecture students, will be online. So I'll still be on Zoom for a little bit.
Yeah. The other gentleman?
Yeah, we've had a similar experience. A lot of Zoom happy hours. Celebrating birthdays and anniversaries via Zoom, and sending people cakes and other fun things for us all to open together on Zoom. So keeping culture and morale up has been crucial because everybody's working very hard. We were fortunate not to have to furlough or lay off anybody, because we wanted everybody to be at full force throughout this to not only learn and collaborate, but then service our clients that were essential businesses. So it's been an interesting ride, and we're slowly re-entering the offices. Chicago suburbs first, downtown Chicago not too long after, and then our Detroit offices, within the last week or so, and offering, Monday, Tuesday for some teams, Wednesday, Thursday for others, and then a kind of a flex day on Friday is how we're operating, with sanitization measures in between, and then sending everybody things at home as well, like succulents for their desk and candles and champagne to celebrate milestones. So trying to keep everybody engaged. Our motto is one boat, so one boat T-shirt for everybody. It's just been finding ways to keep people happy and engaged remotely, because there is kind of a drag on doing everything through Zoom, and so we've been big on that. But as we re-enter the office, all of the implementation measures that I talked about are things that we're doing. So right now I'm in my office, but we've got the decals and the signage and the temperature check station and the increased partitions and the raised cubicle walls and the dry erase boards throughout. So keeping everybody safe and productive has been crucial, and just de-densification has been absolutely paramount. And then outreach to our clients and our community partners. We've done a ton of outreach via mail and via email, mostly with the purpose of education. Trying not to be salesy at all during this, but rather educating them on the return to work and creating a playbook and a checklist as they get back to work, whether they use us or not. We want to make sure that people, have a plan of attack, and that we're sharing with them everything we're learning. So outreach, and keeping our team happy, but then reaching out and maintaining communication with all of our partners and clients has been the other half of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The only thing I'll add is, we're also really privileged to be able to work from home and have the technology. But one thing that's been very helpful is norming around having your children around, and being at a meeting, and your kids can be on Zoom as well during the meeting, acknowledging that a lot of parents and caregivers are doing multiple jobs right now. They're homeschooling their kids. They're doing a full-time job, and we've just been really lucky to have flexible hours, to knowing that parents and caregivers may need flexibility during the day, and that's okay, and we want to celebrate children and celebrate their families, and I think that has been really helpful, I think, for a lot of our team members.
That reminds me of a great point. It's the compassionate leadership that allows their teams to be flexible that is going to succeed here, because nonprofits, just like any other business, are constantly struggling or striving to attract and maintain and retain the talent that any other Fortune 500 company might be trying to get on board. So having the flexibility and that nurturing environment is going to help you, bring people on or maintain your team, which is crucial. Same with the space. People aren't going to want to go back to a space that hasn't done something to make them feel comfortable. So just like any other company policy or culture or HR department, nonprofits need to think about how they're going to make their team feel safe, and how they're going to recruit, because people aren't going to want to go into a space that doesn't feel safe and nurturing anymore. And to your point about kids and everybody working at the dining room table, we've had to pivot our business model a little bit into the home realm. So whereas previously it was all commercial clients and businesses and nonprofits and healthcare facilities, now it's people at home. Sierra's sitting in an Aeron chair right now, which is incredibly comfortable, but a lot of people.
I was going to comment on that as well.
You guys, I just picked it up from my office yesterday. It's so comfortable.
Yeah. Well, I was also going to ask about, do you see a lot of, the homes being extension of the workplace, and are there solutions now that are being specific for the home? Because from what I'm gathering from this panel here is really the workplace is being rethought of. What are we using the workplace for? What is the space for? Because now the work days are so blended back and forth that who knows when we're working and when we're not working, because we're totally dedicated to our purpose and what we're trying to achieve at our companies.
Yeah, a lot of corporations aren't allowing their, people to take their office furniture home, because they're capital assets that are barcoded and things like that. So a lot of people are required to kind of fend for themselves at home, and rather than sitting on a wood dining room chair at the dining room table with your kids across from you, and then everybody having to pick up and move everything off of it to make dinner, it can be really disruptive. I mean, I've had people send me photos of working on ironing boards as a standing desk and all kinds of crazy things. So a big part of our pivot during this has been finding ways to get people efficient, ergonomic furniture sent to their homes directly to their doorsteps without us having to install and deliver it and have manpower in their homes. So the commercial world, has had to pivot a little bit and finding ways to get inexpensive height adjustable desks and inexpensive ergonomic chairs and monitor arms to the home has been a big part of it. And then also pivoting into education. Some people have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids at home, and it's almost like a little school. And so if they're gathered around the dining room table, it can be very disruptive. So creating little desk sets and little learning environments for the home, especially for those that aren't going to feel comfortable sending their kids back to daycare or to school. So that's another way we've been able to pivot and send things directly to people's doorsteps through our online portal or through working with corporations and leadership teams to get their team set up with a uniform solution across the board. So it's been kind of an interesting way we've adapted to help people work from home productively.
I'll just add that, funding permitting, there are also little things that can go a long way. I know that some organizations have been able to support setting up more comfortable work from home stations for their staff, but even small things like a decent pair of headphones or a keyboard, we scrounged up some rusty, dusty keyboards that I know that are making a difference for some people at home, just in terms of their, body having to adjust to that home work environment. We're at our computers way more than we ever were before because we were out in the community so much more frequently in the past. So making sure that we're supporting our staff in that context is really important too.
Yeah, and I know we're going to be signing off here in a few minutes, but Jonathan, I wanted to give you an opportunity to answer the percentage back and how you're seeing people reincorporate into the workplace. I don't believe you were able to answer that one.
Yeah. So we're still working from home for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So just trying to figure out how the rhythm and the cadence in the first few months, how does that adapt into the next few months? So just I think trying to figure out how that continues to evolve over time as well.
Right.
One thing that I didn't mention earlier that may be relevant for some folks is just, although we are also for now working from home, as community partners identify a need to have some in-person engagement sessions, we're also thinking about how to do that safely. So a lot of what we've talked about here is still relevant in that context. A lot of space, meeting outdoors, which we're lucky to do right now, including ample sanitizer, and then small things that are part of our, regular engagement sessions like markers, pens, sticky notes, making sure people have individual fresh packs of each of those. So, and they have individual materials. Fonts are larger, so nobody has to get up close or cram around things. Just thinking about those little things that can make something that's normal for us, like a community engagement session, more safe and make it feel accessible and welcoming for people who are, taking the time and feel comfortable enough to come out, but also want to make sure that they're safe and our staff feels safe as well. That's also really important to us. And then that's like coupled with a virtual option to have the same conversations, just to make sure that everybody feels comfortable. So I didn't want to forget to mention that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for everyone individually, and thank you for the attendees. I'm going to kick it over to Kelly. I know there's going to be a poll at the end here that she's going to talk about, and thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Great session. Loved and appreciated the balance of thinking about space both for the external clients and constituents that nonprofits serve, as well as thinking about keeping their staff people top of mind. So I appreciate the balance and the insight and the experiences of you sharing your wisdom with us. So to the poll, I, along with the other planning committee members, are interested in learning if there is any additional interest in experiencing an opportunity to do a one-on-one. So the poll here is asking, would you be interested in a one-on-one session on this topic? And the answers are easy. Select one, yes or no. So we'll give you a minute or so to do that. All right. And I think, I think we wanted to present the results, possibly. All right. Okay. Great, good to know. This is helpful because this just again allows for those of us planning for future sessions, as well as opportunities outside of the sessions, to be sure that we're providing resources that are important. And speaking of those resources, as was mentioned a couple times throughout the presentation, there is a resource page that is here on the slide deck, as well as has been part of the webinar dashboard. And wanted to quickly, I know it was part of the Q&A piece that Bonnie provided. We heard Bonnie's name mentioned a couple times in the presentation, and she is part of the Design Corps Detroit. They are listed here as one of those resources, and Bonnie did provide some contact information to all of you as part of this webinar today. But we've got many other resources, including those, and thanks to the panel members for plugging the organizations that are coordinating and organizing this series for you. Our information is up there as well, as is Right Size and Weisendale. So there's information there, additional resources for you as well. So this has been another fantastic session. As mentioned, it is part of a series that we are doing. We do have an upcoming one next week that's on HR, and the registration is open for that. So we hope you're able to join us. We do appreciate everybody for engaging with your questions and with our panel members today. When we close out the session, there will be a quick evaluation. If you could please take a moment to do that. Myself and the other planning committee members read that information, and it helps ensure that we are continuing to provide future sessions and content that is relevant and important to all of you. So we do appreciate that. We appreciate you all again for joining us today, and this concludes the webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.